Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Game from Scratch, and Unity 2019.1 was just released, and there's a couple of real common themes here. It's all about coming of age, basically. Back in Unity 2018.1, a whole lot of new functionality was added, and it was added as an experiment. Now obviously this stuff is the future of Unity, but when it's not considered ready for prime time, it's basically just a toy. And some of those things became ready for prime time. Specifically, the lightweight render pipeline, ShaderGraph, and then some aspects of dots. Now, if you're not sure what dots means, well, this is running in the background. Mega City is actually a demonstration of dots in action. This is their way of making Unity high performance and heavily parallel or multi-threaded. Now, this is part of the ECS thing where you separate your data from your logic, and then Burst Compiler. And the Burst Compiler itself is no longer considered to be preview. So we got the job system and Burst Compiler are now ready to be used in prime time, along with the lightweight render pipeline. Also, stay around if you are a Linux developer. That's not something you hear very often on Unity release notes, but Linux developers actually got some love in this release as well, as we will find out. So what I'm doing here is I'm showcasing some of the high-level features with some eye candy in the background. The eye candy now just switching to a little clip from the Heretic, a video they showcased about the high-def render pipeline support at the GDC. Now, LWRP is not yet ready for prime time. It did get a lot of love in this particular release, but it is not actually considered production ready. Now, on top of, okay, so we got ShaderGraph is now ready to be used but in production, lightweight render pipeline is ready to be used in production, and the Burst Compiler is ready to be used in production. But the dots is going to be very predominant in this release. We've got a lot of new things that are kind of migrating or moving their support over to be using the dots architecture, including the recently announced physics system being available in experimental format, some improvements on the 2D side of things that are actually taking advantage of the Burst Compiler, the dots stuff, some new special effects coordination stuff, a new animation system. So that is going to be a big theme of this release as well. There's a ton in there that is basically moving towards or migrating towards dot support. So you're going to kind of run into if you're using the existing say 2018.1 announcement support Unity stuff, you're going to see that stuff slowly faded away or added less. You're going to see a lot of the stuff that is getting new features, new functionality, new love is all on the dot side of things using the new job system, Burst Compiler, and all of that. That is obviously the future of Unity and where you're seeing a lot of the development efforts being focused. But it also is important stuff. It's getting prettier and faster, which is exactly what we need to see from Unity. So that is the high-level view of what this release is all about. Now what we're going to do is jump in, drill down, and take a look at the specifics of what is in the release notes. Now it's getting tricky to do this. Okay, here we are in the official Unity blog announcing for this release of 2019.1. We covered off the top level stuff. We're going to jump over the basics, and we're going to jump into the specifics now. And what they're getting a little tricky with these releases is some of the stuff is promoted or added materials. It's hard to tell what's new, especially with GDC being recent, packages being released or previewed already. So a lot of this stuff is actually already available, but being tagged as new. So I'm going to try and highlight the stuff that is truly new as we get to it. So we're going to go through. There's a ton here to cover. We're only going to do a real top level summary here. First up in mobile, we have mobile notifications. You know what notifications are. This is supported for those little annoying ass pop-ups that come up on your device. It works on both iOS 10 and higher and Android 4.1 and above. Next up, we have adaptive performance. This one is kind of underwhelming because, frankly, it works on just one device. As it's integrated with more devices, this is going to be cooler and cooler, pun not intended. But what this enables you to do is tap in at the hardware level to monitor the thermals of the device you're running on. So you can, ramp up or slow down speed if you want to extend battery life or trying to eke a little bit more performance out. You're trying to not hit that thermal throttling stage. And this is going to give you tighter integration into that level of detail, so you're going to have more control. Unfortunately, it's not really that useful yet because it's only available in the Galaxy S10 and the Galaxy Fold, and I believe about 6 people own the Galaxy Fold at this point in time. This one's kind of nice. The SDK and NDK, which are the native development kits for Android development, can now be installed as part of your Android install. So, using the Unity Hub. So it gets a lot easier to do Unity development in general, and this one's even nicer if you're a Unity developer. If you do print style debugging, you can now get your Logcat. Logcat is the native debugging logging format on Android devices. You can have it redirected directly into the Unity editor, so you can do your print-based debugging. And also, Android itself logs tons of information to the log. So having that available directly inside of Unity is going to make development much nicer for Unity developers working on the Android platform. So we also got scripts-only build patching on Android. This is kind of cool. It allows you to do, when you do the build process, to just recompile scripts, and you can patch your APK on the target devices instead of doing a complete rebuild. Should make your iterations and your deployments on your Android debug a whole lot faster, which is nice to see. Now, we saw a bunch of stuff about AR and VR at GDC this year. They've got AR Remote is now in preview. Feature lets you pass data between the device and the editor, so you don't have to build. So you can basically do, it's kind of like push development here, or live reload, I guess you'd often call it. Handheld AR samples have been added. We've got graphical enhancements for the lightweight render pipeline. Then we've had some WebGL improvements, and here is the Linux thing I teased you about earlier on. This has been talked about forever and ever and ever. Linux editor is now no longer experimental. It is now considered preview. So Linux is one step closer to being a reality for Linux developers working on their Linux platform, developing Linux games. Works on Ubuntu and CentOS, x86 64-bit architecture, GNOME desktop, NVIDIA proprietary drivers, or the Mesa drivers for AMD. So those are the areas where they're kind of recommending. That's probably about 80% of developers out there, so it shouldn't be too bad of a deal. When Universal Windows Platform got ARM64 support. I don't know of any Universal Windows Platform devices running ARM64, but that is the future for sure. As we mentioned earlier, DOTS, or the data-oriented technology stack, got promoted here. It had a birthday of sorts, so now the Burst compiler is out of preview. And then we've got a lot of things that are tangentially attached to DOTS. So DOTS is a new way of doing things, a new way of coding in general. So you're getting new systems that go with it. The audio system is considered experimental, but the audio system that is used in Mega City, which is highly scalable and uses DOTS in the Burst compiler, is available as an experimental, not as a preview, as an experimental at this point. Ditto for subscenes. This was the way that they split that scene. I did a hands-on with the Mega City demo if you're interested in learning more about this, but basically it is chunked out into a whole bunch of different scenes. Like each one of these buildings or quadrants in the scene was a sub-scene and so on. That is in there as experimental format, and of course they did release the assets to Mega City, but that was a while ago. They also had some announcements of DOTS-based physics at GDC, and also integration with Havix down the road. The DOTS-based physics system, I believe, is being tagged as experimental as a package. You need to use the Burst compiler again in C# job systems. So if you haven't noticed, Unity is basically turning into a new product slowly, and they're transitioning systems over. It's going to be a maintenance nightmare for them eventually, but this is the first step in the DOTS-based physics system being available. In terms of existing people, if you're not using DOTS, you're going to be still using PhysX, which got a few improvements in this release, but nothing too magical. The compiler, some profiler updates, blah, 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 blah. Incremental garbage collection. This was experimental. This was actually announced a while ago. So instead of doing garbage collection all at once, you can try to split it across multiple frames. You've been able to enable this on the alpha version for a while, so that's not actually new. I don't think reloading script objects is new either, but I'm not 100% certain there. Like I said, it's getting a little confusing to actually figure out exactly what is new versus not quite. For example, the shortcut manager has been there for a while, but that's definitely a nice new feature. So it gives you the ability to organize and create Unity editor shortcuts all in one place. Editor console improvements. Quick search is available in preview. This enables you to search across everything, such as assets, hierarchy, and settings all in one place in the editor. Animation rigging is a preview package. This is kind of cool. The new animation rigging package gives you more artistic control over your animations. You can use a set of predefined animation constraints to manually build and control a rig hierarchy for a generic character. Also works with the job system. So again, we're kind of moving to that DOTS thing. This one's another nice one. I haven't downloaded it yet because I'm not a big fan of Unity Hub in the first place, but there is a new beta of the 2.0 release. As you can see, we've got a completely new UI. They've also moved a little bit of functionality into it. I forget exactly what the deal was, but they're also sunsetting the launcher that you saw and love here. So that's going away, but you can still launch the normal way from the command line. New retained mode UI. I don't know when this was added, to be honest. I don't know if this is completely new or not. But it is now available. This is considered a preview as well at this point in time. Improvements in graphics, a lot of the smaller things. Again, ShaderGraph got promoted. It's now ready to deploy. Lightweight render pipeline is also now considered ready to deploy. HDRP is not quite ready to deploy, but has gotten some new functionality, including improved platform supports, including support for Linux and Vulkan APIs. Double wide VR is now available. This is an interim thing. An optimized single pass version is coming in 2019.2. They've had improved performance, now use a color buffer of the RGB 111110 float instead of ARGB half, resulting in faster shader execution, improved UI and camera support, debug mode improvements, render pipeline wizard. The wizard helps you configure project settings to work correctly when using HDRP. It highlights incorrectly configured details, as you can see right here, and other HDRP high def render pipeline supports. There is new shader and ShaderGraph support. Several new master nodes for ShaderGraph. The new HD unlit master node gives you access to the full feature set that the cross pipeline unlit could not, such as distortion or rendering path selection. There's also a new AXF master node designed to support the X-Write AXF measured material format. HDRP, new nodes have been added there to integrate with ShaderGraph, improve lighting quality and control. As I said, I'm not going to get too much into the details. A lot of this stuff isn't fully new. Native integration of the post-processing in HDRP. Probably why it's not actually out yet. So then we also have the visual effects graph is considered a preview. This was, I think, experimental before. I'm not 100% certain there. This is going to give you a whole lot of functionality and control over your things like pre-warming, allow you to pre-simulate a portion of the simulation ahead of time. Native rendering plugin support for Vulkan. GPU light mapper is in preview now. Added support for the optics AI denoiser. Multiple important sampling for environments, other lighting improvements. Look dev was removed. I'm not entirely certain why that was taken out, but it's going to come back later on. Cinematics now have signals and markers, allow you to integrate your timeline into your game code based off of events that are fired on the timeline. Timeline audio improvements. We have H265 support in there now. Scene visibility tools for toggling things off and on visibly. We've got some improvements in the 2D world, sprite shape improvements. So sprite shape package, many improvements. For example, you can make the sprite shape's final 2D collider closer in shape to the sprite's visual representation, allowing you to add polygon edge colliders that more closely fit the sprite shape renderer. 2D animation improvements. 2D animation, you'll notice performance boost when scanning a sprite in the editor, also runtime because it's using the C# job system, and burst compiler, noticing a trend here yet. And then 2018.4 long-term support version will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And that is essentially it. If for some reason you want to go into even more detail than this release notes, there are full release notes here that give you basically every little thing that changed in this release. There are an absolute ton of them, so if something breaks in your code, this is where you want to head next. But that's about it. That is Unity 2019.1. Like I said, the difference between versions is getting blurrier and blurrier and blurrier with this move between experimental and preview and things just being released mid-cycle as opposed to not part of the actual numbered release. So it is getting a little confusing when release notes come, but I can definitely say it is nice to see packages moving out of preview. It's nice to see that things are finally coming of age, and things like the ShaderGraph and lightweight render pipeline and burst compiler job system can now be considered production ready. So it's not just a matter of adding a whole lot of features and never actually making things ready to go. Things are actually theoretically ready to go now. So that's a big step with 2019.1. And also, you Unity developers finally got some love and you are considered in preview instead of experimental now. Check out the Unity version. Let me know how it runs. Does it work well? Are we a step closer, or is it still a crashy, horrible experience? Let me know all that. Comments down below. What feature here are you most excited about, or are you not excited at all? Let me know that as well, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.